Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. My guest is Colin Coleman. He's Managing Director, Partner, Sub-Saharan Africa at Goldman Sachs. Good morning and thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
So you've been here in Davos with several people from South Africa, politicians, economists. What do you expect this week to do in Davos?
Well, obviously Africa is keen to get its place in the sun. South Africa is the biggest economy in Africa, is very keen to attract attention for investing. We want to get the investment up into Africa and South Africa specifically.
And what's your feeling for 2014 in terms of investments in Africa?
Well, Goldman Sachs' global view of the world is of a developed market-led recovery. In other words, the United States and other countries, coming back from the global recession, added by China and other global emerging markets showing big growth. So Africa is going to benefit from the developed markets recovery. We will also benefit from China continue to grow, particularly as a commodity exporter. And so we're hoping that the boat will lift all tides, and certainly Africa growing off a low base at 7% global average growth for Africa is a strong growth story. And South Africa is at a lower growth but a big economy. So it's a bit like a solid car with a turbocharge of a Ferrari engine behind it in the form of African growth. And we're seeing that with corporates like Shoprite and Massmart and Standard Bank and various industries, South African companies going to Africa and showing superior growth opportunities.
So Colin Coleman, you're from South Africa and you have been very involved in your country history. You've just published a study called 22 decades of freedom, where you describe strengths and weaknesses of South Africa, 20 years of democracy. You're also a former anti-apartheid activist. Your entire family fought against apartheid. You knew Nelson Mandela quite well. You actually organized one of his first business meetings when he was released from prison. What was your first impression of Nelson Mandela?
Well, he was a very regal presence, a man of the people, but a leader of the people at the same time. And this is somebody who would come and greet the kitchen staff preparing the meals for the conference, and at the same time absolutely impress the senior business people who were waiting with bated breath for him to speak. So he has this ability to talk both to the average person in the street and to the leaders and make things happen. And that's his living legacy in my mind.
And he decided right away not to nationalize, is that right?
Well, this example you give of this conference, he got on the stage and he said to the then prevailing CEO of Anglo American, I've waited 27 years to tell you that nationalization is not the only word in the ANC's economic vocabulary, meaning that they had a broader intention of growing the economy, addressing the legacies, and they've done that. The 20 years of freedom demonstrates how they have lifted the poor significantly, 16 million people now on social welfare out of 52 million, 10 million into the middle class in the period. Growth has almost tripled in the period of 20 years. But we have a legacy of unemployment and inequality that has persisted.
So the fact that actually he didn't nationalize was the good decision to make back then. That's what you're saying.
Effectively, they entered into a world where the economy of South Africa was bankrupt in 1994, and they brought about modernization of the economic environment, and was very effective in its monetary and fiscal policy, which continues today. And South Africa, I think, is universally acclaimed for the monetary and fiscal discipline that's been shown.
So the good part is basically the middle class, which actually exploded. Can you tell us a little bit about that in 20 years? How many people came from nothing and all of a sudden got some average?
Well, in fact, the poor have actually been assisted as well. So you've seen 4 million people leave the lower income levels and enter into the lower and to the middle, and then another 5 million who've graduated from the middle to the upper. And so in that process, you've seen a lifting and the purchasing power of black South Africans that has enormously grown. And you've seen that in the retail world, the consumer world, the telecom world, the banking world. And so the economy and corporates have benefited tremendously. And obviously the lives of those people have been lifted significantly.
So but you say in your study that inequalities become wider as well. So how do you explain this?
Well, the Gini coefficient, which is the delta, the measure between the wealthy and the poor, has more or less stayed the same, which is a very high Gini coefficient inequality
in 20
number
years.
in the 20 years. But effectively what's happened is the richer have got richer and the poorer have got gradually less poor, but the rate of the poor getting less poor has not closed the gap with the wealthier.
You said that 85% of Africans remain poor today in South Africa?
In fact, it's roughly today about 80% of whites are wealthy and 80% of Africans, black South Africans, remain poor. And so, this is a legacy of inequality. If you think about it, 300 years of colonialism in South Africa, 20 years of democracy, we've made significant progress, but this is going to be a generation of really closing this inequality gap and closing the problems with unemployment. Just put in context, 14 million people in South Africa are working, 7 million people are unemployed, and a lot of those unemployed are under the age of 34. So today at the conference we've been talking about what are the measures that we can take to address unemployment.
What would you advise the current government?
The study shows that there are basic things we need to do better. So we're investing more money in health and education, for example, and information technology.
So that's more money to spend.
More money is being invested, but the outputs are lagging. In other words, the administration is not spending that money effectively enough. So we just need to get the basic delivery systems, the management systems in the government to deliver those services better. But at the same time, the extraordinary measures that are being taken. For example, the government has introduced a tax subsidy called the Youth Wage Incentive, which basically incentivizes employers to be subsidized to hire young people into their firms. And this is an extraordinary measure to facilitate and catalyze youth employment. And there are other measures such as trying to get the youth who won't be employed into the Defence Force to earn a stipend and do some work and learn a skill. So the combination of those will help. Fundamentally, though, we need to stabilize, and the study shows, we need to stabilize the mining sector. We need to get production to improve. We need the labor markets to become more efficient. And so through that, we need a much greater productivity and growth that will drive more participation in the economy.
Through investments, because it's true that growth is not as it used to be. It's as if there was the end of a cycle in South Africa in terms of growth.
It's very lumpy, the investment cycle. We're at about $2 billion of investment a year into South Africa, of foreign direct investment. We need to get that up more to $5 to $10 billion in the period. And so the way in which we're going to get foreign direct investment is being much more clear on our regulatory regime, much more clear on our labor market regime, and attracting more people to participate in the Africa growth story through the South African companies.
We talk a lot about corruption in South Africa. How do you think that could change? How could there be a better governance?
Look, I think it goes back to the growth story as well. The more we have a growing pie, the more people are participating, the more likely it is that the governance will succeed. In a situation where the pie is shrinking, people are grabbing for their part in the participation, particularly because of the legacy of non-participation. And so it's very important. Having said that, South Africa specifically is a very modern, sophisticated world, and we have an independent judiciary, a very open media environment. The legal system is very clear. And so, it is a place...
You're very optimistic in terms of corruption?
Well, I think, that framework is one in which corruption will find it difficult to thrive. And the more we make sure that that framework remains, the more we'll be successful in tackling the environment around corruption.
And talking about participation, what do you think of the next election? What can you expect?
Well, I personally think this is going to be Mandela's election. It's going to be the legacy. The legacy in which, obviously people are very aware. It's very fresh and very painful in South Africans' minds. And, the ANC, is very closely associated with Nelson Mandela. But Nelson Mandela was everyone's hero in South Africa. And so I think that it's highly likely that this election will be much the same result as before. I think the key is going to be the 2019 election, when we've had more time for the dynamics in the politics of South Africa to germinate, And if the ANC succeeds in implementing its manifesto and its policies, it will be in a strong position. If it doesn't, the jury will be out and they'll have work to do.
Do you think they might succeed?
Well, I think it comes down, and the study basically says it's about how we take the very talented people in the country, across the institutions of business, government, state, and put them to work.
The current politicians, you think that might succeed?
Well, they have to, the president, whoever the president is, and it's likely to be President Zuma.
Zuma again.
Will have to choose his cabinet extremely carefully and put an administration in place. And that's the reason President Zuma said he was not at Davos, because he's preparing the transition to the fifth administration in South Africa. And one can hope that he puts the most talented people he can find into the government, because the government has to become far more efficient in its administration.
Thank you so much, Colin Coleman.
My pleasure.
And thanks to you for watching. Stay tuned on France 24.